All right, let me just quickly run through. We're a little bit late starting, sorry. Equipment issues. We are videoing for YouTube this week, so there will be a YouTube link, not a media site link, which is a good thing, I think. This is the last week of lectures. For the next 3 weeks, you've got the opportunity to make an appointment with me if you want to. So if you want to talk to me about your anno bibs, I'm working on those now. I hope to get those back in a couple of days so that you've got those to continue for your next submission. If you want to talk to me about your presentation information, which I probably have forgotten to open the checklist for, so if it's not showing up tomorrow, please someone remind me that I need to make sure you guys have your information for that final presentation. The week of Thanksgiving, I won't be here, so I'm going to England. So if you need to talk to me, please try to talk to me before Thanksgiving week, because I can't guarantee that I'll be checking my email. I plan to try, but a lot of people wanted my time when I go home on the rare occasions that I go. So check in. There will be a sign-up sheet going up probably next week. If I can get it up this week, I will, but we need to start thinking about signing up for either the 1st of December or the 8th of December. So be thinking about which week you want to sign up for. There's a lot of people in this class, so it'll be first come, first serve. I might change the timing of the presentation and shorten it if I need to, because usually we don't have this many people. And so we can get you all done in 2 weeks, but with a 20-minute or so option. But I'm not sure that we can get you all done with 20 minutes this semester. So keep an eye on that, because I might have to change the timing a little bit, right? Okay. All right, so last piece of information is just really my attempt at trying to put the puzzle together for you for the rest of the semester and going into 505. So we're going to talk a little bit about what are you going to be doing with your 10 annotated bibliographies once you've developed those for the next submission, right? So the summaries that you're writing for your annotated bibliographies should provide you with a foundation for your chapter 2. Could you pull that door to as well?
Sorry for interrupting.
No, that's okay. Your chapter 2, if you remember, we talked a little bit about what chapter 2 was going to involve. That's your literature review, all right? This idea of developing your argument for your purpose statement. So those annotated bibliographies will give you a good start on chapter 2 in 505. Now, when you use those anno-bibs in your chapter 2, you have to remember to cite them within the text. And that citation will reference then your reference list. So one of the things you have to be finicky about and detailed about is making sure that anything you have cited is also in your reference list and vice versa, right? It is a reference list, not a bibliography. The other use of the word bibliography means a list of articles that don't necessarily relate back to the text, right? That's not an option in APA or in your thesis preparation. So it is a reference list. That means everything has to match up in both directions. So you don't want to be guilty of plagiarizing. This idea, I've got to give credit where credit is due for something that I'm using. So an idea or a statement, try not to quote. All right, it's technically correct if you quote and then you cite the quote properly using APA format, but that's not good writing. It means you can copy from someone else. It doesn't mean you can write. So a whole essay full of quotes might be technically accurate, but that's not good writing, and that would look poorly on you as a graduate student. So try as hard as possible not to resort to using quotations. You should be able to read a statement and reword it for yourself and then cite that that statement came, that idea came from somewhere else, all right? So citations save you from being accused of plagiarism if they're done correctly and used appropriately. They also help the reader because you might not use the citation specifically for a statement. You might make a global statement and then cite several papers that might include that information. That allows your reader to go, oh, I'd like to find out more about that. Let's find these references and go look them up and get the reference for myself and read it for myself. Right? So the citation plays a dual role there. And you don't always have to summarize the paper. You may only be using one piece of information from that paper. Right? And when you want that piece of information to support your argument, then you would cite that paper, even though you didn't summarize. So your summaries are going to be for your key papers possibly. They'll help you decide what information from your articles are useful for you. You may or may not want to summarize everything, right? I might just want to back up a point I want to make. The sky is blue. Who says that? Where do I find that piece of information from? And as usual, make sure you check your APA manual, because as with the references, there are very many forms of citations depending on the particular piece of work that you're using. Right? So they don't have a global citation format. It depends. So how many authors do you have? Changes what your citation looks like. The first time you cite it, you might have to do one format, and then later in the paper, if you cite it again, you can change the format to make it shorter if you've got lots of authors. All right? So the citation rules can be quite complicated, and feel free to come and ask for help if you need help with those when you get into writing your chapter 2, because they can get pretty tricky. And things, the silly things that they do, like in the reference list, you have to, the point at which you put the 3 dots and then you put the last author is 7 authors or more, but in a citation, you don't cite 7 authors. There's a different format for citing 7. But if you have 6 authors, you have to list all 6 of them. Okay? So they use different rules for the citations than they do for the references, which makes no sense to me whatsoever. All right? So just be wary when you get there. So as you're creating this synthesis, you're going to use all this information, you're going to synthesize it into an essay, in effect, that's chapter 2, to introduce your reader to all the information surrounding your question and why you came up with your question, right? So the idea is to try to involve the reader with the interest that you found and then show them why you came up with this question, right? What was missing as you read the literature that led you to the question, right? So you want to kind of entice the reader along, not make them work very hard with your synthesis. So you might want to use subheadings to guide the reader, almost like traffic lights. Here's what's coming. Okay, the next piece of information is about this topic, right? Don't have standalone paragraphs or sections. So it's important that you have an entrance in and an exit out, that you link paragraphs. Okay. So I shouldn't just have a paragraph about brain cell development without explaining to the reader at the end, or at least linking the previous paragraph into, transitions in and out, right? That's good writing style. The reader shouldn't have to do all the work to read the paper. So you should transition in and out paragraphs, you should transition in and out sections, right? The whole paper. You're going to have an introduction at the end and at the beginning and a conclusion at the end. Those are kind of transitions, right? So, as I say, you want to lead the reader through. Don't make the reader do the work. That's poor writing. If I'm not sure, I'm reviewing an article right now and I keep catching myself. I spend hours and hours going, what are they trying to tell me? What are they trying to tell me? And then I'm like, why did I spend 2 hours asking myself that question? That was their job. Not my job. My job is to read the paper and follow the argument. I shouldn't have to ask why. That's bad writing. Okay? Or at least very poor writing. Let's be kind and put it that way. Right? So at the beginning of the paper, you want to make your purpose statement very clear. You don't have to use the term the purpose is, but I would. Makes it simpler. The typical format in our world is that if the data has not been collected yet, you say the purpose is, and we will collect data. Once you've collected the data, it changes to past tense. The purpose was, and we collected X. I suspect that that might change. They certainly don't do that in maths. I have this conversation with my partner all the time. He said, well, the results are the results are the results. The results aren't were. The results still stand. So it should still be present tense in his world. And that argument makes sense to me. It's just not the way that we typically do it in our area, right? At the moment. So that might change. You want to make your argument very clear, right? Why is this a question? What did you not find in the literature? What did you find that made this a question? And remember, it's okay to be critical. You shouldn't always put in everything that supports your question. You may have found something that says this question isn't relevant. You should also tell your reader that. You shouldn't only put in the support, you should put in the argument against it as well, if there is one. There isn't always, right? And then the work, right? Draft, redraft, draft it again, draft it again. You'll have to draft it a lot of times. So 505, how many drafts you have to do will depend upon how many of you are in the class, how many times the instructor has the time to read your drafts and give you feedback. If you do a thesis, you will just keep redrafting it until the chair of your committee is happy with it, right? So that could be a lot. I did my chapter 2 7 or 8 times for my dissertation. It might only be once or twice. What you have to try to accept is that it's never right. And that's okay. Right? It's basically never right. You could just keep drafting forever and ever and ever and ever. At some point, your instructor and or your chair is going to go, you know what, enough. You've done enough work. We'll move forwards. Right? Doesn't mean it's right or it's finished. Just means you did enough work on this to get the degree now. Move on. Let's do something else. Right? So try not to, a lot of people I think get tied up with the idea that all the feedback and all the corrections and having to draft it again means they're doing something wrong and they're not doing a good job. That isn't necessarily the case. Right? I can tell you that from a grading point of view, from a feedback point of view, the more feedback I'm putting on the paper, the better the paper is. If there's no feedback, you should be seriously concerned, right? Because that means it either was so bad I don't know where to start correcting it. That's typically what it means. Or there was nothing to correct because you didn't put anything, it's all separate pieces of information that don't link together. You know what I mean? So no feedback is not a good sign. No feedback is a very bad sign. The more feedback there is, the more there was for me to work with. That's how I view it. Right? If I'm scribbling away, that means there's something on the paper worth scribbling about. Right? You have a great idea, but you haven't quite put it across properly. That's worth helping. But if this is nonsense, why waste my time trying to fix it? Okay? So try to consider that drafting and the feedback. I don't use a red pen. My advisor used to use a red pen, and it used to scare the pants off me. The first time she gave me back a piece of work, my first chapter 2 submission, and I had worked so hard. I was so proud of this piece of paper, and I handed it in, and about 2.5 weeks later it came back and there was red pen all over it. And I was like, "Wow!" I stuffed it in the drawer in my desk and I didn't look at it for about 3 weeks because it looked so angry. Like she was absolutely furious with me because there was reds. And she's like, "Sarah, it was great." I'm like, "Okay, I thought you thought it was awful." So I deliberately don't use red because to me it looks angry on the paper. So I use pink or purple or green or orange or something else. It's never really meant, it's not meant to be angry. All right, that was just my ridiculous response to not feeling very confident, even though I had done a lot of work on it. Right? Sometimes it's difficult to get started. Getting started is the key. You can look at a blank piece of paper for a very long time, but it doesn't help, all right? So, and I always have this Chinese proverb to remind me, but I never can remember the actual proverb. But there's a proverb that says something along the lines of, in order to complete a long journey, I have to start by putting 1 foot forward. Okay? And that is very, very true when you're writing. A lot of people don't find writing easy. Okay? And so for many of us, it's really hard work. And the hardest thing is getting started. Once I've got something on the paper, anything on the paper, it gets easier from there on, right? Plus, once you've got something on the paper, you've got something you can bring the faculty and go, help. But if you come in with nothing and you go, help, there's nothing for us to help you with. Like, we can't help if you don't take that first step, right? So, really try. And the other thing I would suggest is if you're struggling, put anything down on paper and put it away. Put it away for a day, 2 days, an hour if you don't have very much time. But if you're struggling, put something down and put it away and do something else and come back. Because when you come back and you look at what you wrote, you'll either go, oh, of course, I know exactly where I'm, right? Or you'll look at it and go, what the heck was I thinking? And it will help you start afresh, all right? Don't sit there staring at it. You'll spend hours and hours and get nowhere. It's a complete waste of time. I've done it, trust me, don't do it. It's a waste of time. Staring at it will not make the words come. So go use your time more productively and come back to it. All right? Grammar, sentence, because this is graduate school, right? Whether we like it or not, it doesn't matter how smart you are if you write like crap. Right? That's just all there is to it. Grammar, sentence construction, spelling, punctuation are really, really important. If you're not good at them, go get help. Right? There's a graduate study center, there's a regular writing center, there are programs online that will help. Get people who are better than you at writing to edit, buy them a pizza. Right? But it's really important. You will lose marks if the writing is bad. We're not going to give you a degree if at the end of the day your writing is horrible. Whether you do a thesis or comps, if the writing is bad, you're going to fail. So work on it now and help yourself along the way. All right? Plus, from a reading point of view, it's really hard to read something that's badly written, right? Particularly if it's the grammar that's bad. Because sometimes it's not always easy to identify what you're trying to tell me, and sometimes it's just plain not fun. Like, I am having to work so hard to put the pieces together in this paper. So really think about that. The chapter in your book talks about reader's block rather than writer's block. We often are staring at this piece of paper going, oh, I have writer's block, I just don't know what to write. And the book, our textbook says, well, that's not writer's block, that's reader's block. Go and read something else that stimulates you to write something about it. Okay? Which I think is a great idea. I never thought of it that way until I read this book, but that's actually quite a good way to approach it. I don't have writer's block, I haven't read enough yet to be able to write about it. Right? Check the APA manual as well. There's lots of information on how to write well. It's not just a nuisance with loads of rules that we have to follow, although it is that. It actually has some very useful suggestions and strategies for trying to write well and what is considered good writing in a research paper. All right? So use the resources that you've got. All right, so basics, page 340. Let me just double check where we were going with that. Drafting, redrafting, we've talked about that. Sentence construction and language. Can I say it more clearly? Sometimes students they think that if they use complicated language and big long words, that makes them sound like they know what they're talking about, right? Don't worry, just say it really simply. plainly, use simple language. Don't worry about making it sound clever, right? You will occasionally get feedback that says these sentences are too short and choppy, can you link them together? But I often think that's a better error than having to say, this sentence is 5 pages long, do something with it. That's not okay. That's harder to correct, I think, than linking up choppy sentences, personally. I think that's easier to put right. Use headings and subheadings. So when I write, as I'm about to have to stop doing again and I'm really out of practice, I like to make a map ahead of time. So I'll have my main heading and then I'll start thinking, okay, what kinds of sections do I want? Which papers are going to go in this section, right? And then I can move the sections around if I decide that they're in the wrong order to make my argument. Right? I can't write if I don't have that outline. Dr. Drabs, who you guys, Charlie knows Dr. Drabs, you guys don't know her because she retired last year. She's completely opposite. She's just like, I just need a piece of paper and I'm just going to start writing. And then I'm going to go back and I'm going to look at the writing and I'm going to go, okay, that piece has to come out, go there, that piece needs to move there, right? I can't. I cannot just write if I don't have an outline. That's not happening in my world. There's no right or wrong way. You've got to find what works for you as a writer, all right? So make sure that you've got your transitions. We talked about that. Keep reading. Okay? So don't assume that you have all the information you need to write your chapter 2. Because there's always more out there. So keep looking. Don't kind of shut the gate and go, okay, I've got everything I need. Keep looking, because you never know when you might find the one piece of paper, the one article that changes your entire outlook to something, right? And then the mistakes. So the mistakes start at the bottom of page 343 and they're perfect. Padding, right? So we don't tend to get so much problem with padding in grad school as in undergrad, but just because you hand me in 20 pages doesn't mean that you're going to get an A, right? Because it depends what's in the 20 pages. If you wad it full of stuff that's irrelevant to the question, then none of that helps you, right? Repetition. So some students panic and go, well, I have to keep repeating because this isn't long enough yet, so I'll just say it all again. That doesn't help, right? There isn't a length. There's not a length. On average, in a master's dissertation, in a master's thesis, probably you're looking at 20, 25 pages maybe for chapter 2, on average, right? Average, remember our bell curve? That means I could have 10 or 12 pages, or I could have 36 pages. Depends on your subject, on the literature that's out there, on the argument you're trying to create, right? On your writing style to some extent, okay? So don't get hung up in, well, how long is the paper supposed to be? As long as it needs to be to make the argument, okay? Don't try to say too much, so don't go off on tangents and then have to bring yourself back. Stick to the plan. This is the argument I'm trying to make. This is why I'm taking the reader down this road, because I want them to understand this point. I don't need to tell them about this, even though it's really interesting. It's not relevant to the path and the argument. Right? Stick to the point. What else do they say? I love this bit in this chapter. And then they talk a little bit more about leaving some time. So it will come back and kick you, I promise. If you write this stuff the night before it's due, you will not get the grade you want. Promise you. Because that's not how writing works. You need to write it, walk away, come back, read it, edit it, write some more, walk away, come back, read it, edit it. You have to. You can't just write it and hand it in. It's not going to grade well. You've got to catch yourself, reorganize things, realize that what you wrote didn't really make sense. Remember that you're writing for someone. When you start writing about your purpose, you are now the expert. You're the expert. You've done all the research. This is your question. You know more than anybody else about this question. So that means that when you write, you have to step back and go, okay, the person reading this doesn't know that. I can't make that assumption. I'm writing the Idiot's Guide to Cortisol Measurement in Preschool Children. Because now I know everything. Okay? So you have to keep rereading and catch when you do that. When did I make an assumption about what the reader knew? What did I actually mean by that sentence? Because now I'm reading it and I'm not even sure what I meant when I wrote that sentence. Right? But if you don't reread, you can't reread once. Editing takes more than one read. Right? So give yourself plenty of time. If you rush it, A, you won't enjoy it, B, it won't be very good. This should be fun. Right? You are writing about something that you have decided you're interested in. So take the time to enjoy it. Enjoy looking up for new information. Right? Get into the database and go completely crazy for a couple of hours. You never know what you might find. It's a heap of fun. But only if you have a couple of hours to do it. If you've got half an hour to find a paper because your 10 annotated bibliography is due in 2 hours and you only have 9, this is not fun. It's not fun. Right? So don't go there. Right? Review it, put it away, come back. It might be an hour, it could be a couple of days. Right? Get a friend, someone who doesn't know the topic to review it because they'll catch where you've made an assumption, right? But if you ask people to help you out and read your work, remember that what goes around, right? If they do it for you, you need to be available to do it for them or for the next person that needs help. So, some hints on your 3 chapters. Make sure you know what your critical papers are. So, if I go back to my outline idea, what I do is I decide which of my critical papers is going to help me argue that subheading. And then I have another list which is, and which other papers have a comment in them that would support something I want to say under that subheading. Right? That's my way of organizing it. Be critical. Right? Remember that just because it's in writing doesn't mean it's 100% okay. Editors make mistakes. Writers make mistakes. You're going to find papers that say things that maybe they shouldn't say, given the data they've given you in the paper. Right? Oftentimes what happens is people do a great big study and then they cut it up into 3 separate papers, but they forget to remove a conclusion statement that relates to the data that they didn't put in that paper, and it doesn't get caught by the editor who should catch it, right? But editors work for free and they do it in their spare time, so they make mistakes, right? Think about how you're going to index and track these research articles. So by now, I suspect you're starting to pile up some research papers, right? How are you keeping track of those? When you come to write your chapter 2 and you want that one paper that says that, what paper is it? How are you going to find it in the stack that you've got? Index cards or some kind of electronic tracking system is a great way to go. You know, have your authors have the year, have their purpose, have a brief description of what they did, right? So that you don't have to go through every paper to find the one that says that one thing. You're like, I know one of them said that, I know it, where is it? That's the one I need to make this argument. How are you going to track that down? You don't want to waste 3 hours going through every paper you've got to find the one that none of you have the time for that. Okay? Everybody is busy. So it takes time to index, but it's time worth spending because it will save you time down the line. Plan your lit review. So I suggest planning your lit review because that's how I write. Not everybody wants to do that, although I suspect that most of them have some kind of a plan in their head. They've got an idea of what they want to do. They just don't like to formally outline it the way I do. Right? Be thorough. Make sure that you're not missing a crucial paper. That's why I like literature reviews. If you can find a recent literature review on something to do with your topic, that saves you heaps of time because you can run through their reference list. You can go, I've got that one, I've got that one, I've got that one. Ooh, that one looks interesting and I hadn't found that one. Let's go look that one up. Saves you heaps of time. They're great. Lit reviews are a super tool if you can find them. Present controversy. So if there's conflicting evidence, make sure you present both sets of evidence. Don't only present the evidence that supports your argument. Hook the reader, right? So at the beginning, give them enough information that they're interested to keep reading. Right? They shouldn't be guessing. That's why you have to have the purpose statement up front, because the reader shouldn't be guessing what the heck is coming down the line. Right? So make sure that you get it going and get some interesting information up front. You want to start out wide, narrow down to your purpose during the lit review. Right? So here's kind of what we know. Now let's really sift through it and feed you into my purpose question. Why did you find it interesting? Right? What are you going to put up front that explains why it's interesting? Oh, I have another note to myself. Page 351. Let's have a look. Must-dos. Oh, 6 must-dos. Address the research question. You'd be surprised when that doesn't happen, right? So what's the question that you had? Stick to it. Don't go off track. Why are your research questions relevant, interesting? Okay. You might want to talk about the theoretical background for the question. I think that generally is more PhD dissertation type concept. but it will depend on how entrenched in the theory your question is. And then once you get out of chapter 2 and you start looking at chapter 3 and chapter 4, what did you do? Why did you do it? What did you find? We don't always, sometimes the results are very peculiar when you look at the methodology. Okay. Be grammatically correct. So everybody's going to keep shoving that down your throat. So it's really, really important that the writing is well done. As I said, there should be lots of places you can go on campus to get help with writing. Right? If you find that you are not getting the support you need to let us know, because then our job is to report that and make sure that that problem is corrected. Because we get told as faculty that there's plenty of support out there for you as students. So if it's not there, or it's not doing its job, you have to let us know so that we can try to fix that. Right? Because it's not a department, like we, the HPE department, don't have writing advising. That's a university, that's a campus-wide issue. So you have to, I don't know, right? I just go by the graduate school tell me that there's help available. So if there isn't, or if you can't find it, or if when you go they're not very helpful, you need to let us know so that we can do something about that. Right? Okay, and as I said, the APA, I kind of bash the APA manual most of the semester because it is a thorn in everybody's side. But there also is some very helpful information on how to write well. What does a good piece of research writing involve? So use it. Right? Make sure that you, and chapter 3 in this edition, in the 6th edition, I think does a very nice job of trying to help that writing clearly and concisely. They give you all kinds of really cool strategies in that chapter on how to help set this out and make it as easy to read and as easy to write as possible. Right? And then I just put that little quote in at the end that comes from our book. I really like this statement. At the heart of effective research writing is a process of selection. What do I include? What do I omit? And the process is going to ultimately reflect what it is you believe is worth saying about the topic and the question that you picked. Right? It shouldn't feel overwhelming because you're writing about something you wanted, you chose, and you're interested in. If it's overwhelming, it's probably because you haven't given yourself enough time to do it well. Right? Because it takes time to do this well. It's not an undergrad paper. You cannot write it at midnight the night before and hand it in. That's not how this is going to work. Not if you want to have a good outcome. All right. So the rest of the semester is building this foundation so that you can start to do all of this when you get to 505. Put all the pieces together to create this amazing argument. Right now you're not making the argument, you're just finding the information, the support. But synthesizing that information is what creates your argument in chapter 2. Question. Ta-da! Thank you.